So in this video I'm going to address something that I think is quite common, and I'm getting a lot of, like questions or just marks or whatever, remarks from different people about this, and I want to address this because it has quite a large impact, not on the things I do necessarily, but on how other people are doing certain things. So let's say that you are in a society where everyone is wearing white t-shirt and jeans, and that is like the common conformity norm that is within that society. If you are adhering to that kind of dress code without questioning why you're doing it, but you're just doing it, you are basically just, letting yourself be dominated by the dominating form of discourse that is going on in that society. You are not necessarily, extending your own questioning or just understanding of why you're doing it. You're doing it to sort of conform into that, and that means that you are manipulated and you are basically allowing for that domination to be oppressing you in that sense. And this is quite something that is, the philosophy behind science and just science in general, social different social sciences and so forth, they sort of addressing these things. And I want to sort of put this in relation to religious forms of dressing, because some people would say, oh, okay, so if a religion has a form of distinct type of clothing, then that would also be showing that it's a form of dominated way, of dressing or whatever. Like someone is dominating someone in order to dress, and in doing something, acting in a certain form of behavior. But the thing with like religious form of dressing is that it has a conscious form of intention behind, so most people, okay, they might grow up, and in this primary form of socialization process they may not question the things that they are receiving as form of truths, or like just concepts of the reality, through the language that they speak and from their parents and the surroundings and so forth. But as they sort of getting older, there's quite often common theme that people will question things, especially if you have grown up in a form of secular society and so forth. So people will have that mindset of questioning things, and especially if you are exposed to other forms of thinking. And now this is actually more commonly that you are exposed to one form of dominant kind of majority way of thinking in relation to something else, that you maybe have grown up with from your sort of setting of your own parents, and that has been part of your own primary socialization process, But the thing is with, as you're sort of going about and exploring why are you doing certain religious forms of dressings, so let's say if you're dressing modest or something for religious reasons, then that in its own is not, if you're looking into why you're doing that, you can actually say that it has some form of, other types of, meanings. And also meanings that are sort of supposed to stretch beyond their own human experience, and their own human way of dominating other people, While if you're looking into, while people are sort of, let's say fashion trends, they are sort of dictated by a small elite of men in most common ways, and they are sort of mostly targeting women who sort of adapting into those trends. And those trends are mostly, in a sense, just to generate a certain form of conformity into the way that the society wants you to behave and to be looking like, And it doesn't have any form of, when it comes to religious dressing, there is some form of positive benefit for yourself, and as well for the whatever that religion, God has as well, let's say now these more common religions, while this form of other type of conformity into some society norm is not really looking into, bringing you benefits, but it sort of is dictating and ordering you to do something but to enjoy it in the same time. Because, you know, as things are sort of becoming more present, like when there is more conformity that becomes present in society, you're going to get like this positive feedback from other individuals if you are conforming to that norm that is present in that society. And if you are not conforming to that particular norm, you're going to get negative feedback. So it becomes like a fulfilling prophecy, you know, that you actually are undertaking a certain form of behavior, you're dressing in a certain form of way because you're getting positive feedback back from the mass that is in itself dominated by this sort of, you know, by this form of discourse that is going on. So, I mean, you are not free at all. You are just very much, you know, dominated by something else, you know, and you are accepting it, you know, because there is this very interesting thing that actually is discussed in some form of, you know, some philosophers and so forth are discussing this, you know, and that is that, you know, before we maybe have this form of authority, you know, that was saying, okay, ordering things, you know, saying that, okay, you should do this and you should do that. And that was it, you know. But now with this more totalitarian form of power, you know, there is this kind of concept that it's not only dictating you to do something, but it's dictating you to enjoy it while you are doing it. So while you are performing a form of duty, you are basically also inquired to, you know, experience some form of pleasure and happiness in doing it, you know. And that makes it like, you know, it sort of is enforcing that behavior for yourself because you are experiencing a form of happiness while you are conducting the duty, you know. And, you know, that is like a very interesting concept, you know. So let's say if everyone is doing exactly the same, like if every single human being was wearing a pair of jeans and a white t-shirt, what would that sort of bring us? So let's say after a few generations and everyone has wear these things, the memory of those future generations wouldn't know anything else. They would think that this is the only possibility or way of doing this, you know. They wouldn't have any kind of alternative understandings for that there is other ways of doing it. And the worst thing is that they wouldn't even question it because they're getting a positive feedback from the group because they are actually adhering to that norm, while they actually on that sense also is dominated in order to behave in that way, you know. And that's why there is this whole, you know, sort of, you should be sort of more awakened in that sense of, you know, understanding these processes, you know. So one of the positive things, you know, about actually sort of, you know, and you can test this for yourself. And I think a lot of people who are within these more religious kind of, I mean, for example, if you are sort of identifying yourself as a Muslim, you probably are maybe, you know, adhering to some form of modesty things, you know, when it comes to dress codes. And you maybe even have some, you know, culture, you know, that has another form of expression, another form of, you know, put together of colors or whatever, like in the clothes you're wearing, you know. And the thing is with that is that if you sort of abandoning it, you know, and you're sort of moving into this more conform, this discourse that is being the dominant one in the society, you're basically abandoning a form of alternative to that dominant current discourse. So, and it becomes like, you know, less important of your own, you know, memory and of the societies and general mass memory. And it also becomes a form of, you know, because in order for something to actually be sustained, you know, especially in the form of a society where it's very individualized, like your identity have to continuously be reinforced. You have to continue to recreate your own identity in a society that is individualized, because otherwise it's going to sort of be hard to maintain it, because you don't get feedback, you know, from other people in sort of maintaining that identity, you know. So if you have some form of let's say rituals, you know, that are religious, you know, religious related rituals, you know, and you sort of is questioning, you know, in order for you to sort of conduct them, you also have to sort of be able to justify them in order to be able to conduct them in a more, you know, day-to-day life, you know. And you will sort of compare that justification to other forms of activities that are present in not only in your own life, but, you know, in comparison to what other people are doing, basically. So you must be able to justify what you actually is doing and what is important, because otherwise, if that justification isn't there and you are not really, you know, undertaking that part, because it's a very important part of actually maintaining a form of action and so forth, then it's sort of going to get less prevalent, you know. And the less expressions that we have, the more general, the more same the mass is, the more it just shows that these discourse of manipulating the mass into conforming into a form of sameness, it's just showing that they are so dominated by that. So, I mean, to have your own expression and to not, I mean, that's why I say, like, okay, when people don't know where I am from, you know, when they sort of having this, they want to label me, first of all, with a national identity. And I want to say something that national epochs, you know, there is a really good book, you know, that sort of is very easy to read, and it's sort of addressing this globalization movement. I mean, we have these multinational corporations that have more power and even more wealth in capital compared to other nations, you know. So we are not really longer in this form of epoch of nations, where the nations are the main, you know, actors on the arena, on the global scale. It's actually the multinational corporations that have that power and that tools and capital to actually influence and sort of choose and decide for what is happening down on a local scale, and also for entire nations, you know, because they have more capital than most nations, you know, alone have. So, I mean, to just focus on the national identity is not really going to give a clear answer on what that individual is actually thinking, or how that individual is sort of, you know, conceptualizing the world, basically. Because as you know, that in the more secular setting and so forth, this whole, you know, value system that is placing so much empathy on the form of individualization, it also means that, okay, people are probably going to adhere to some form of conformity, you know, that is very shaped within this form of sameness, you know. But there's still the possibility that individuals can have other forms of identities, you know, that can be, and also just to have their own form of expression, you know. So it doesn't really say that much if you're just asking for national identity. And also what I think is so important is that when people associating certain clothing and whatever, you know, into certain categories of people, they have sort of addressed into this whole concept of what is the normality, you know, within this discourse that society is sort of undertaking, you know. And it also shows that, you know, the mass that is conforming to that, they hold some form of, you know, value in itself. And it also placing, as I said, some form of values on cultures, you know, themselves in a form of monetary value. So you're placing value on certain cultures, and this is what sort of is happening as well. But once this becomes the only thing that we are seeing and what we are sensing and what we are knowing, we don't know anything else than that, you know. I mean, if that is the only reality you see, you are going to forget and not be able to see beyond that. You are not going to see alternative ways of actually understanding the world. Like, we are so used to, you know, exchange goods and services with the, you know, with money. So we don't even questioning the whole monetary system. We don't question why we have this form of modernized type of capitalist system, you know. And we don't even question why there's only a few people who actually, you know, gaining from this system, you know, because we are so used to it. We are like brought up and understood that this is the truth. And this is even I mean, of course, if you are a student and so forth, you're probably going to get into contact with these concepts of, you know, there's not really anything in science that can claim absolute truth, you know. There's absolutely nothing. We can only have the theories, you know, that sort of is best explaining a form of phenomena or whatever, you know, but we don't have that actual truth, you know. Within science. And science, you know, in comparison, has been very much attacking different religions, and it has also been attacking quite a lot of different alternatives, you know, to what the sort of enlightenment process has sort of focused focused its science on, you know, of what we have actually created based on the enlightenment process and so forth. So I mean, to sort of narrow down the world into a very much sameness is just allowing for a much smoother way of rule over a large amount of people. And especially when people are saying that their pleasure is in these things, for example, that we as humans, we are demanding regulation, you know. So if we experiencing pleasure in regulation, in having a schedule and so forth, it's going to be very easy to apply this form of legal system, you know. It doesn't mean that the legal system itself is the ultimate truth, you know, that we have, like, because the legal system, you know, for different nations and so forth are like framed, you know, by certain individuals, and the interests and the values, especially the values behind that that system, you know, and that can be very you know, it can have different forms of values, you know. So it doesn't say that it's the ultimate truth, you know, that we sort of having these forms of things. But since we are sort of experiencing a form of pleasure in having these things, it just becomes sort of easier to take the order, you know, and fulfill these things that we sort of have as an order, that you have to do this. But instead of just have to do it, if you are enjoying it in the same time, it doesn't feel like a duty, you know. So that's why I think it's very interesting, you know, when people have this form of concept of they have, the people who have the hardest time to see alternatives are the ones who are the most manipulated by this dominant system. And I see this quite a lot over in Sweden, because there is quite a lot of people who have abandoned every other form of concept of what they actually could perceive as a form of alternative to the way that they sort of are understanding their reality. And especially when it comes to these form of cultural expressions and so forth, like they have very specific forms of ways that they sort of are perceiving to be the absolute of that expression, and how it should be sort of viewed and sort of expressed, and what they sort of you know, associating other types of expressions with, you know. And that's just a form of how they sort of have been able to manipulate into that, you know. They have been manipulated into think that, you know. So it really isn't saying that much about other people who sort of is not conforming to that thing. It's just sort of highlighting how manipulated they are. So I mean, I think that you know, it's quite interesting. But I mean, at the same time, most people are quite high educated, you know, over. So I feel like there should be more like knowledge about this. Like you should have understanding for how these systems are operating and what is underlying these and how are they functioning. But people, and especially in science, because you sort of want to invent something new, you know, you want to see beyond these things that are only what we have as a status quo, you know, not like a completely different reality, you know, but just other alternatives, you know, that can be sort of improving the reality that we have, you know. But in most scenarios, this is not really what's happening, you know, because also, you know, for example, I am a student, you know, and the scientific, you know, tradition that I am in, it holds a certain set of views and worldviews and so forth. And I'm sort of, when I'm in that scientific tradition, I'm like observing the world through those forms of theories and concepts, but I'm not in anywhere near the truth, you know. I'm just near to the best possible explanations, you know, whatever has been enforced into that tradition, you know. And there's always the potential that there's gonna come up some other form of paradigm that's just going to swipe away all that knowledge that has been within this tradition, and it's going to be something new. And I feel like in many of these, you know, social related sciences, there's always this form of transformation that sort of is adding together a fuller picture by sort of combining different not sets of knowledges, you know, so it sort of becomes a more fuller perspective and holistic understanding of things, you know. But yeah, so I think it's quite interesting, you know, when people have this whole concept about what they're associating certain things with. But it's like important to understand the whole how we are dominated. And also, if you believe something, you know, if you have a thought and you know, believing strongly in a form of knowledge, then you are dominated by the fact that you actually are living by that knowledge, you know. So I mean, for example, those who adhere to religion and so forth, I mean, I say that, you know, religion has like something that is stretching beyond the human form of experience. Science on that turn, you know, I mean, science is possible to bring forth very, you know, useful kind of things and less useful kind of things, and, you know, understandings and concepts and whatever to apply on the world. But if you're believing blindly in it, you know, then you are also dominated by that, you know, because you are leading your life based on that. You are the implication is that you're going to take actions and behaviors that is conforming to that set of knowledge that you hold, you know. So be aware of where you're getting your knowledge from, and what is the value behind that, you know. What is the value behind the knowledge that you have?